Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, Business Innovators Radio listeners. Welcome to another show. I'm your host, Andy Curry, and I'm excited today to have with me David Hults. Now, David has been speaking professionally for 14 years, and the topic he speaks on is called change management. It's really interesting. We're going to get into that here shortly. David speaks primarily in the U.S. He's based out of Missouri, and he has written 5 books. And I asked him to give me a couple titles of his best books, and his first one is called From Cornered to Corner Office. His second book is called Ringmaster. He's got 3 others. We can talk about those during the interview. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, I want to begin by saying, I'm not sure if the listeners can hear, but there's a kind of a squeaky noise in the background. We tried to solve that, and it's some kind of a audio interference, so we beg your forgiveness if you can hear that and it drives you crazy. Just listen to what David has to say because he's got some good information. So, David, tell us how or what you're doing in the speaking business, the groups you talk to, the things you talk about.
Well, I started off speaking when I created my coaching business, worked with individuals on career transition or developing their own careers, and found that speaking was a great opportunity to connect with people, to be known in the community, and so it was kind of a natural bend for me, an easy way to develop rapport and trust. So I started speaking a lot on topics around change, an individual changing their dynamics, where they're working, finding new opportunities, and the process of going about doing that. So I started off doing that, and then I reached out to several members of NSA, National Speakers Association, joined that professional group, met that criteria, and began to then develop more and more materials around, because I seemed to be going down this path of how people can be empowered to create positive change for their life and their career. And so I began to go down that road and wrote books that supported that. And so now I've been talking to organizations, a lot of healthcare organizations that are going through lots of change right now, and how to deal with that. For managers, how do you manage people that are going through change? When you mention change, people typically don't like that word. So there are other ways to talk about it and present it. And so I've now created several books and several topics that deal with change.
Change, as everybody's heard, is the only constant. And if you don't embrace it, you're always going to be, I guess for lack of a better, behind the 8 ball. You're always going to be stressing out, that kind of thing. What's one of the most important things you would tell people about embracing change?
Well, understanding your own behavior to it. So understanding when something happens, we typically follow a pattern. In fact, in my latest book, Ringmaster, is all about how do you manage the 8 strategies of change that happen within every work environment. So it's learning to identify what are the behaviors. And I've identified 5 different circus acts that really resemble 5 different personalities and how they respond to it. Now, we all actually will identify with all 5 of them. However, there's typically a pattern that we move and gravitate toward through most change. And so I have, one of the circus acts that actually I perform when I'm actually talking around Ringmaster, this book, is what we call the daredevil. And the daredevil has this ability to look at change and say, great, we could also do this and we could do this. And so these people who are typically inspirational, these are people that will jump off the cliff and figure out how to build the plane on the way down. These are people who have slept on the street waiting for the new, iPhone 6 or 7 to come out. And they don't know enough about it, but they're going to be first, and they don't care. They'll figure it out as they're in the midst. So those are great people to deal with change. However, the negative side of that personality is that oftentimes they have a little bit of ADD, so they don't focus in. They come up with lots of ideas, but they don't execute or focus in on one. So as you manage people through change, you need to understand that about that daredevil personality.
How do you manage people who fit different criteria besides that one?
Well, the other 4 acts. One is called the Lion Tamer, and they hear the roar of change every day, every month, every year. What they're known for doing well is taking 1 or 2 changes and creating an act. So they create structure for the organization. And these are people that say, well, if it's going to come, if the merger is going to happen, all right, here's what we need to at least have in place to at least start to manage this. And they're big on that structure. And if you don't give the Lion Tamer that ability to start to create structure, they'll leave the cage. They'll leave the organization. And you have the juggler who says, oh, this could be good, this could be really bad. And the great thing about a juggler is they typically are saying to the managers, we already work 10-hour days. So how are you going to, this new thing you want to implement, how do we logically add this to what we're already juggling? And so what the juggler often does is challenges the director or manager to say, okay, what's reasonable? What's logic here? If you can help me understand logic of how to do it while we're juggling other things or removing other things we're juggling or doing it better, then they'll commit to it. And so you have the juggler, and then you have the tightrope walker. And the tightrope walker says, okay, wait a minute. This is high risk here, and I'm never going to run across the rope of change. I'm going to take it one step at a time. So what are the things? Because they're going to want to do a pilot program and figure out all the details. And, if you change this one thing, it changes this, and this. And so these individuals are about the details. And so often as a manager, what you need to do is you need to create a net underneath them. And you say, what's one step you can take toward this change? And by the way, if we have to start over, I'll take the fall. So the ways to manage those individuals. And then you have the weightlifters. And these are people who've done the grunt work of the organization. These are people who have been around, maybe have a history, been with the organization for years. And they'll say, oh, God, we tried to do this 8 years ago. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. So what you do with those individuals then is you put them in a room and you say, okay, so here's this change that's coming. The merger just happened. It's on the way. I need you to shoot holes in it. Let's write them all up here on the board, and let's figure out what we can do. And so what happens then is they're able to give their opinion, their voice. They feel like they've been heard. And that helps the weightlifter move forward. Now, the positive side of the weightlifter is they've had history, so they can say, guys, this isn't a new idea. Let me share with you what happened so that we don't have to recreate the wheel. So every single act, every single personality adds value to the organization when it's going through change. So you just need to know, how are you acting? Are you, in this particular change that's going on, how are you gravitating and moving toward that personality? And if so, what do you need in order to help you move forward? Mm-hmm. So those are the behaviors to identify and then to manage if you manage others.
Okay, that sounds like you've taken a complicated deal and distilled it down to something people can follow and figure it out.
Yeah, there's even in the book, there's a profile you take, you answer 20 questions, and it tells you which behaviors you're like. And then it even says, take this to your manager and share with him, here's what you need when you're going through change in the organization. Here's typically where you go. So you start the conversation, you start dialogue about how do you respond and what you need so that you can help move yourself and others through change.
Interesting. Now, you said you do circus acts while you're talking.
Yeah. Each one represents, so, Daredevil, I've actually got, it's kind of an illustration of a glass mug with this rope that's attached to it. I hang it over this large stick, and there's a weight on the end. And I'll talk about being the daredevil, and I'll let go of the weight. And what happens is that the weight wraps around the stick, and the glass doesn't break. So it illustrates the risk that we take as daredevils. So each one incorporates, a tightrope, a whip, a bull's whip, that I use to illustrate the loudness, the disruption that happens with the Lion Tamer, and explain what the Lion Tamer does with a whip, and that it's never intended to hurt, but it's intended to create boundaries. So each act, each little performance illustrates different points about that particular behavior.
Interesting. I've used a bull whip before. I bought one years ago. Never could make that thing crack. I bet you're pretty good at it.
Well, at first I've had some sores.
I'll bet.
But I've learned. I've learned how to use it now. So
when those things go off, as you know, they sound like a gun going off almost, don't they?
They do. It definitely captures everyone's attention.
Now, as a side note, I think when that happens, what's happening is that end flips so hard it breaks the speed of sound barrier, correct?
Correct.
And that's what makes that cracking noise.
Yep. And it cracks right above your ear, typically.
Uh-huh.
So it's important that you learn that technique.
Right. Now, how did you get started exactly in the speaking biz? That the very first day you were asked to speak, and it kind of took off from there. Talk about that.
Well, I volunteered is what I did for an organization that actually was focused on job seekers, people that had been given the pink slip. And they needed some speakers to come in, and so I was not a main speaker at that time. I did a little workshop after the main speaker spoke. And so what I did was hone my skills in on topics and the presentation and adding stories and getting feedback, and did that for quite a few years in order to kind of develop my skill. And so that's how really I got started in the whole biz of speaking.
Okay. Now, you've obviously spoken several events. Which one sticks out the most in your mind where you really made an impact, and what was it?
I would have to say there's an organization here in St. Louis called MGMA. It's a Medical Group Management Association. That was I spoke several times that day. It was quite large. A lot of people were asking lots of questions of how could I manage this differently, and so it kind of struck a chord with everybody in the room. I've also spoken for a hospital over in Illinois for their management staff to walk through, and so I spent half a day talking to them around this and had activities and had some takeaways so that everybody, it wasn't just a speech, it was everybody involved. And so what I often find is that when you're speaking, and it's really not about you, it's about them. So if you can get them to participate and be a part of it, then they walk away much more engaged, and they apply exactly what you're talking about.
So what was some of the feedback you're getting? What touched you the most?
People that one individual felt he was going through really what we call job burnout, and helping him identify what was happening within his role. And so I talked to him about a concept I call job shaping. So how do you take your job and then shape it? So actually, that's another word for change, but we don't use change. We use shaping. And I could get him then to actually see possibilities of how he could shape what he's doing in a direction that actually gives him energy, and he would enjoy his work even more. And so that was exciting.
So do you think he was focusing on what's wrong with his life and the job, or what was going on with him?
Absolutely. I think when you get into a position or a role where it's not really working for you, you're so tied to the stories that go along with the painful experience that you can't separate yourself from the story to look at it objectively and say, okay, so let's reset. What could you do? Not what's happened, but what could you do about that? And really outline actionable steps that brought him out of that.
So you've got someone in what they consider maybe a dead-end job, or they're just very unhappy. You're helping them reframe how they see it, and they're in the same job, and now they're happy.
Correct.
Well, what a great thing to do for people.
Yeah, rather than always just saying, well, it doesn't work, so I got to leave. How do you add value? The key is, how do you add value? And add value in ways that fit your own personal brand, the things that excite you. So how do you go about identifying it, and then how do you go and make appeals, and how do you write proposals, and how do you move forward? And not every organization is going to be receptive to it, and others are. Just no one's asking the questions. No one's done that. People typically just like, well, I'm not getting a promotion, or I'm not getting a raise, and so therefore it's time to move on.
Right.
And there are a lot of things that can be done prior to that decision. In fact, I've created in St. Louis a job shapers network that is just the whole sole purpose for a monthly meeting is to talk about what are the strategies to shape or reshape what you're doing so that it works. In any organization, if you can make an appeal that says, here's value that I can add to your organization, or add to the team, or add to our streamlining things, or becoming better at, or adding, new ideas for income stream. What organization? Very few of them are not going to be open to that conversation. But we often don't know how to do that.
Right. Okay. Well, that's really good information. That makes my heart smile when I hear helping people overcome the negativity that they see where they are, and to stay where they are and turn it into a positive. That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, it's great work to be in, because you're literally changing lives and actually changing families.
Right. Well, David, if someone wants to hear you speak, how can they get a hold of you? What is your contact information?
Yeah, they can either call me directly at 314-966-3888, or they can log on to my website at activatecareers.com, and that's ACTIV, the number 8, careers, CAREERS.com.
Well, very good, David. Thank you for giving us a peek into your business and what you do. That's fascinating information.
Right. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.